The essay is going to be due before like you show up for class. You should have it submitted, right, on Schoology. So not by the end of the day, you show up for class, it should be submitted. So we're just not handing in a paper copy this time, we're submitting it on Schoology, so I can utilize the features on Schoology to grade it and track it and make sure everybody's done with it. As long as I can see everything, that's fine. Yep. So the problem you run into with pictures sometimes is if people do more than one page and they don't know how to get a photo that extends, then I run into problems. So don't just take a picture of the first page, whatever. If you do 2 pages, you gotta make sure the single image file you upload has all of it on it. Okay? Question?
I forgot about we have to turn it in digital, but I can't
Yep.
say it, but, like, I don't know how I'm gonna do
Okay, you can scan it or something and submit it. Do you have a period 1 class?
that. I don't actually.
Okay. Yeah, figure out if you can do a period 1. You can handwrite it and everything, and then there's a way to scan it. I think they have a scanner in the library that they can do for you real quick, or you can, one of the computers has a scanner right next to it.
Okay.
Okay? Alright? Okay, so then you got those sheets already. If you don't have them, they're posted online also. In terms of the test, it's the same format as always, meaning there's half matching in groups of 10, and then half multiple choice with 5 options. So I'm gonna go through the matching section very quickly, just kind of point out some of the key terms, and then after that I'm gonna address mostly the application section. So chapter 6 is this, the section or the chapter that dealt with sexuality. Some of the concepts in there include a bunch of the terms related to sexual orientation, such as heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual, asexual, etc. If you remember what the prefix means, it helps you, right? So hetero means multiple or more than one, homo means 1, bi means 2, a means without. So if you're aware of what the prefix means, it's going to help you. Primary and secondary has to do with sexual characteristics that develop biologically. So what's an example of a primary sex characteristic?
Can you repeat that?
What's an example of a primary sex characteristic? Or trait, you could say also.
Biologically?
Yeah, and I don't even know if you want to answer this question necessarily, because sometimes it's embarrassing to say, but it'd be the organs used for reproduction, right? So then what would secondary sex characteristics be? Voice, pitch,
Facial.
hair, yeah, stuff like that. Okay. What's the difference in terms of our text definition of sex and gender?
Isn't sex like your gender? Sorry.
Sex is like your biological,
Appearance.
like identification, and gender is like what you think you are. So
Yeah.
like,
Not necessarily. You're mixing up sex and sexual identification. In this context, sex means the biological, like what the actual biological traits are. Gender is the culturally or socially developed ideas about what should be associated with a sex.
okay.
So gender could include like secondary sex traits and potentially primary also, but it's more socially and culturally driven. So for example, with gender, like we have things that we identify as like male or female, like light blue and pink. That's not a sex issue, that's a gender issue in the hard definition of the terminology. Does that make sense? Whereas sex is like testosterone, genitals, etc. Okay? Do you understand? Okay. All right. What's the difference between what's the difference between a transsexual and an intersexual?
Intersexuals are born with like both body parts, like both biological sex characteristics, and then transsexual.
Transgender's like the change in the of one
Right.
automatically.
Yep. So if somebody considers themselves like to be one that's different from what they're biologically, that's trans. Inter means they possess physical characteristics. Our text identified this runner from, I believe she was from South Africa, and I probably talked about that.
Oh yeah, during the Olympics.
Yeah. So where she like outwardly had female genitalia, but then for whatever reason, inwardly instead of having ovaries, she had testes, and then that led to a big spike in testosterone. So then people are like, well, can she compete against girls or not? So that's an example of somebody that be intersexual. Okay, let's go to chapter 7 then. Chapter 7 deals with deviance. Deviance often includes stuff that's illegal, but deviance always means different. So deviance basically is the act or state of being or having a status that's different or engaging in behavior that's different. So, what is an instance of repeating criminal behavior called? What's the instance of repeating criminal behavior called? So you go to jail and then you get out, there's a really high chance that you'll go back to jail. They measure stats on that. They say there's a 30% chance of this if you were in trouble for this instance, or a 20% chance for something else. So it starts with a R. That's called, no, not rehabilitation.
What is
She said rapist.
No. Well, people that commit sex crimes are very high risk for this thing. It's called recidivism. Recidivism. So that's why, in part, we feel a need as a society to say, okay, sex offenders, right? We're measuring recidivism in them. We'll say they are a high-risk sex offender. It means there's a high chance that they'll reoffend. So recidivism means basically the likelihood that somebody's gonna reoffend. Okay, what type of crime is it if it's a business that's whole purpose is to like commit crime?
White collar crimes?
No, not necessarily.
Corporate?
No. The business's purpose is to do something illegal. So like during Prohibition, there were businesses that basically existed to smuggle alcohol, right? So that's called organized crime. If it's like a business or an organization that like one of their main purposes is to do something that's illegal, that's organized crime. Okay, what's white collar and corporate then? That was my
White
next two
collar
questions.
was
Committed by people of high civilization.
Yep, then
Wait, yep, so don't read the definition, explain it to me.
white collar is like the higher ups.
Not manual labor,
They
like,
not
basically
High
like
class.
commit crime, but like it's not really dealt with in the manner it should be.
So like
So,
NSA crime.
okay, the difference here between white collar and corporate is how many people are involved in essence. So white collar is where like one person or maybe a small group of people would commit a crime. Often it's just one person, but it's somebody that commits a crime in the day-to-day operation of their job, if it's kind of a white collar job. Example, a couple years ago there was a lady that was kind of the accountant for a big auto dealership in Moorhead called the Big Lots. And they found out that, I think it was her and a guy, there were two of them involved in it, like a manager, but they were like gradually taking money from the business and like depositing it into separate accounts of theirs. That's white collar crime, okay?
so embezzlement.
Yep. Now, did you hear about how Volkswagen, there's computers and machines that will kick out a reading that tells you how much pollution a car is kicking out? And like California, you have to get these like tests done in your car to make sure that it's not kicking out too much pollution. Some countries do this also. Volkswagen had some engineers that basically like as part of a policy tried to cheat the system. Like they programmed their cars to dodge those sensors. Like, so they're still kicking out a lot of pollution, but they programmed their cars to trick the sensors into thinking they weren't, right? Volkswagen in and of itself does not exist to commit crimes, right? But to get around this problem their company had, they committed crime. That's corporate crime. Like the company kind of as a whole did it.
So like conning, would that be one necessarily?
Doing what?
So conning, like a con man. So you sell
That
stuff.
that would be white collar.
Yeah, that would be white collar.
I'm
Yeah.
confused.
Like a hitman, like some.
No, hitman, that would be,
Oh, white collar.
that would
Oh,
be
no.
organized crime,
Yeah.
right? That would be.
Well, because
yeah.
they're already
Because they
planning
joined
to-
together just to.
Yeah, so if you have a business, okay, let's look at Volkswagen as an example, right? Legit company, their purpose is not to commit crime, right? It's to sell cars and help people get around, okay? Therefore, it's not going to be organized crime. If you have a company that exists for the purpose of committing crime, let's say the video we watched, Slumdog Millionaire, and how like Mammon was in charge of the gang, and then they like intentionally tried to get donations from people that really weren't for like charity or whatever, they were for them just to do what they wanted. That would be an example of organized crime. If you have a business, or even like a school, for example, Atlanta public schools a few years ago had a whole bunch of people like cheating for the students on the standardized test to try to avoid a lot of the policies. That would be an example of corporate crime, because it's crimes committed by a business, like systematically, like it's going on in the business. Wells Fargo, a whole bunch of people created fake accounts for people in Wells Fargo. Did you read about that in the news at all? This came out like 2 months ago probably. But basically they set goals for like how many new accounts they had to create, and then a whole bunch of people in there, it wasn't just like one person, it was a ton of people, created this scheme where they created a whole bunch of fake accounts for people without them knowing it, but then charged them fees for these accounts. So if you had like a checking account at Wells Fargo, they'd like create a savings account for you and then charge you fees in your checking account, kind of hide those fees in there, and you didn't know about it, right? So then they got caught, and then they fired like 4,000 people company-wide. So it wasn't just like one or two people, right? That's corporate crime. That's crime that exists in a business. Wells Fargo in and of itself exists for legit purposes, right? But they had a lot of people committing crimes for the company. That's gonna be corporate crime. If it was like one guy that was siphoning off money from Wells Fargo, that's white collar crime. You see the distinction? Okay. All right, Noah, so there, besides the identification section, I think there's a couple scenario questions with that. Okay, if you commit a crime or do something really bad and then people start to identify you with that bad thing, you've developed what's called a social what?
Stigma?
Social stigma. So it's a really powerful negative label. What theory in deviance says that deviance and conformity result not so much from the actions themselves, but how other people respond to the actions? Labeling theory. Which one says that the way to prevent deviant behavior is to get people to anticipate or to think about the consequences?
Trends?
No, that's what it is. That's not the theory, but
Like differential association.
no. Pick the other one. There's one more. Differential association is the next question I was going to ask.
Control.
Control theory. Yep. You want Sam? Can you shut the door now?
Yeah.
Thank you. So control theory says that you need people to think about the consequences if they were to get in trouble, and if they do that, if they anticipate the consequences, that's going to make it less likely they'll engage in that behavior. Differential association theory says that the people that you hang out with and who you associate with basically shape the likelihood that you'll get engaged in deviant behavior, but also how you identify deviant behavior.
So like that's socialization theory? Or
Differential association theory.
So is the control theory like the drive sober, get pulled over thing? Cause
Yeah, because they show you that and they want people to think about.
they have like the big signs on the interstate.
Yep. Yeah. So that theory says that what matters most in deviance is trying to get people to identify the potential consequence.
Cause
Yeah.
I've seen like those billboards where it has like a police officer is it, are you going out tonight? So am I. Like
Yeah.
that, like, although I don't like commit crimes, but it
Yeah.
really scares me.
You're not going out tonight? No drunk driving today?
No.
Okay, that's good. Yeah. Yeah. There are some people unfortunately joking about that with the election, about how
Yeah.
my life is meaningless and I need to just go get hammered. Like, if your life is, if you're worried, as important as elections are, if that's what really shapes it, that's too bad. Okay, anyways, let's go to chapter 8 now. Chapter 8 deals with social stratification. What's the difference between wealth and income? Let's start with that.
Wealth isn't it like the value of what you have and like what you own, but then like the income is like what you get.
Yeah, income is your basically your salary or what the money that you make. Wealth is the value of all the stuff you possess. So my cousin that farms in western North Dakota owns, I don't know, probably a section of land. So, and then a house and all that. So his wealth is more than mine. But his income, at least some years, is less than mine. Does that make sense?
So a lot of his wealth is like tied up in what he owns, and yours is more like in his in your banking account, basically, because you don't like.
No,
spend as
even if
much.
I had it in the bank account, that would still fit under wealth. Income is like your salary, what's coming in.
Okay.
Okay. Wealth could be cash assets, or it could be gold, or it could be property, or whatever. So, but let's say I had a whole bunch of stocks, and then I had owned property, and all that stuff, and I had a net worth of $2 million, but then I got fired or got laid off or something like that. So then I would have a very low income, but a very high wealth. Okay. Right now I have like a upper middle class income, but a very low amount of wealth. You know? Does that make sense? Okay. All right, we also talked about class, caste, and meritocracy for systems of social stratification. Which one is based totally on effort and talent? Meritocracy. Which one's based on just where you were born in the system? Caste. And which one's a combination? Class system. What's the ability to move either up or down in a social class system? What's that called?
Social
mobility.
Social mobility. Yeah, social mobility. People that, remember we talked about Karl Marx' Communist Manifesto, right? Who are the people that control the means of production?
The government.
No.
I'm screwing up. Well, I'm screwing up.
Well, in a pure Marxist system, yeah, but when Marx was writing, like, who did he identify at that time as being the people that controlled the means of production? Yeah, which citizens specifically?
Upper class.
The landowners, yeah, he called them the bourgeoisie. Sometimes, like in a more modern sense, they'd be called capitalists. And then, who are the people that just sell their wages? Or their labor? So all they have to offer is their labor, they don't own
The
anything.
lower class, the working class.
Yeah, what's the term Marx gave for them? Starts, proletariat is correct, or proletarians.
Credit goes to her.
Credit goes to her?
Yeah.
Okay, proletarians is correct. Can you actually turn the switch off on that, just so it, there's a switch in the back? And then remind me before you leave that we have to turn it back on, okay? Thank you. All right, let's talk about chapter 9, which is on global stratification. What's the difference between global stratification specifically and social stratification broadly?
It deals with like basically the world itself, like it's broad, not just on a certain country.
Yeah, well, stratification is like any differences that exist, right? Could be within a country, could be broadly. Global is comparing country to country. So how do the average people in the United States compare to another country? So in our text, they divided 3 different categories of nations. What were the categories?
High income, middle income, and low income.
High, middle, and low. I'm forgetting the exact numbers, but low was like I wanna say $5,000 or less. And then middle was like 5 to 12, and then 12 and up was high, yep. So where are most of the high income nations located?
Northern Hemisphere.
Northern Hemisphere, yep. In addition to that chapter, we talked about two theories to explain global stratification. One was modernization and one was dependency theory. Which of those two aligns mostly with functionalism? Modernization. Because modernization says that the problem is the poorer countries haven't modernized. They haven't developed new cultural beliefs or new technological capabilities. So cultural beliefs, for example, in some countries say, women shouldn't be educated, they should just help raise the family, whatever, and then the men should be the ones that go to school. So in that system, that cultural belief leads to less science, technology development, because you have half as many people going to school or whatever. Dependency theory aligns mostly with which of the three main theories in Soch? Conflict theory. It says basically that the rich nations keep the poor nations dependent on them. And that's why they're still poor. Okay, next, what's the difference between colonialism and neo-colonialism? So we were one of the British colonies, right?
Mhm.
So that's colonialism. What's that like?
Like you basically like answer to them.
Like one comes from the other.
Yeah, so you have a country that's in charge of other lands, and they don't really have a say in the other lands. So it's exploitation, it's one country taking advantage of people that live in another area. In neo-colonialism, instead of a country taking advantage of poorer countries, who's taking advantage of the poorer countries?
Corporates.
Yeah, corporations or businesses. So last year I played a video about that. It was one of the John Oliver clips on tobacco companies and how like a tobacco company sued some small country that had like a yearly GDP of like $40 million or $50 million, the entire country did, some small Pacific Island country. Whereas the tobacco company that sued them has a yearly revenue of like $5 billion or something, right? So they basically tried to sue this country like crazy to get them to just do what the tobacco company wanted, right? So then that's an example of neocolonialism. Okay? All right, let's go to chapter 10 then. Chapter 10 has to do with gender stratification. What is the expected behavior that's tied to a specific gender or sex called? That's called a gender role. It's expected behavior tied to a specific gender. If you're in a society or a company or a family that's dominated by males, what is that?
Patriarchy.
Yep. If it's dominated by females, what is it?
Matriarchy.
Matriarchy is females, patriarchy is males. What is the belief that one sex is innately superior to the other? Sexism, good. What theory in conflict theory attempts to explain how people that have multiple statuses of disadvantagedness, such as being disabled and a woman, or being like African American and a woman?
Isn't that hate crime?
No, that's the behavior. But what theory seeks to try to explain how they have to deal with like a lot of problems?
Intersection theory?
Intersection theory, yep, exactly. Okay, and then what's it called when somebody makes comments, gestures, or physical contacts that are deliberate, repeated, and unwelcome?
Sexual harassment.
Sexual harassment. Okay, good. Okay, let's move in the multiple choice section. Some of these are, again, a lot of these are things that I won't cover here that are only in the reading, but just to kind of give you some ideas. We'll talk about issues of sexuality, such as how over time beliefs about sexuality have changed. And a lot of that is culturally constructed. The text actually talks about how the word like missionary position came into being. Did anybody notice that? So they reference how a bunch of missionaries moved to a island region in the South Pacific, and then they would like marry people, and then they're like, what, you want to do stuff this way? Because none of the people in that region engaged in sexual behavior face to face. So then over time they started to call it the missionary position because that's how missionaries did it. Anybody remember reading that or not? Okay. Well, anyways, so the attitudes about sexuality are different from culture to culture, and then they change from time to time. Okay, next. If you feel like you're somebody that's trapped in the wrong body, what's the best term most used for you in regards to sexuality?
Transgender.
Transgender or transsexual. Good. What is the very strong more we have that says don't engage in sexual behavior with family members?
Incest.
Taboo.
The incest taboo. Taboo is like a super, super strong more, something that we wouldn't even want to talk about. Okay. Yeah, that's too hard. Some of these questions are like really hard to distill down to just a little snippet. Okay, in the case of pornography, why do conservatives typically argue against pornography?
Because it exploits
it-
women.
Sorry, go ahead.
It like exploits people.
Yeah, why else?
It makes women like look like
Sexual
less,
objects.
like yeah, like sexual.
Yeah, but people that are liberal do that too. Like, what's the main concern for conservatives? They just flat out think that it's immoral, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Whereas liberals tend to focus more on it turns women into playthings of men, or it exploits them, or whatever. So some liberals actually say that, pornography could be okay, assuming that the woman totally is choosing to do it, and, it's produced by women, and women have a lot of say in it, whatever. A lot of conservatives say it doesn't matter if women want to be involved in that, it's still immoral. So you get this weird unification in the case of pornography where a bunch of conservatives and a bunch of liberals argue against it, sometimes for the same reasons but sometimes for different reasons. Okay, our text talked about manifest and latent functions of sexuality, including prostitution, right? Remember, functionalism assumes that if something continues, it has to continue only because it's functional. Yep. So what are some of the latent functions that were discussed in the text related to prostitution?
Isn't latent like the unintended?
Correct.
Isn't it that like those men who are not like attractive or whatever can I don't know how to explain it.
Like
Can get their fulfillment that way?
Yep. Yeah, that's one example that the text identifies as, I think the wording in the text says something like,
unattractive women can be like fulfilled in there.
yeah,
Find other means of
Mhm.
sexual pleasure.
yep, yeah, that's what the text argues. Okay, next.
Sorry, just had to get that out.
Yeah, it's always tough to talk about these chapters, it's interesting. Anyways, next. In the nature-nurture debate, let me give you a statement. I want you to identify this, if the statement aligns more with a nature view or a nurture view. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. If somebody argues that homosexuals are born that way,
Nature.
nature. Somebody argues that girls like to play with dolls because that's how our society teaches them.
Nurture.
Nurture. If somebody argues that transsexual people are that way because of experiences that they've had in their life.
Nurture.
Nurture. So you guys understand the difference in there? Okay. We also talked about Merton's strain theory. If you remember, that was the one where we had the 4 boxes. If you look in the text, it's like conformity. It basically says pick a goal, a societal goal, and I think the example I used was make money, right? And then try to figure out what's the typical ways that people do that. And then you can, by looking at those 2 variables, identify what type it fit in. So,
What chapter was that?
7, the one on deviance. So in strain theory, if you just go to work and go through the motions, what's that called? No, you don't really commit to it, you just, whatever, you just kind of go through the motions. You engage in the behavior, but you don't really believe in it, but you just do it because that's what everybody else does. That's called ritualism.
This is a hard one, remember?
If you accept it and you engage in the behavior, that's conformity. If you accept the goal, but you don't agree with the typical way to achieve the goal, what's that called?
Innovation.
Innovation. Yep. So be able to identify some scenarios with that one. Okay, next. We also talked about something called status consistency in addition to social mobility. So if like you are poor and then your children become wealthy, what type of social mobility would that be?
Is it second generation?
Yeah, not second generational, but you're on the right track. Something generational social mobility.
Yeah.
Intergenerational social mobility. If you start out as poor and you become wealthy, what's that called? Intra. Okay, what if you have somebody that has like, they make a ton of money and they're super respected and they have like a PhD? What type of status consistency would they have? High status consistency. What if you have somebody that has a PhD that's totally disrespected and doesn't make that much money? Low. So be able to identify those ones. Okay. Also, there's like 2 or 3 questions where it gives you example countries and it says these countries fit into what type of category, high, middle, or low. That section should be pretty straightforward. I mean, like, for the most part, again, if it's a Western European country, it's going to be high, right? United States, Australia, Canada, etc. Next one. Margaret Mead and George Murdoch studied gender in different societies. In Mead's research, what did she find? Did she find like consistency across the board, or did she find differences in terms of what they identified with gender? She found differences, yeah. While there were trends, there were some differences she saw. Okay, how about Murdoch's research? There was some agreement as to feminine and masculine tasks.
Oh, is that the one where you said that even though someone would say they're like this gender, but they still like participate in like homosexuality somehow?
No, I don't think Murdoch talked about sex in the like intercourse or whatever standpoint in terms of behavior that's very directly related to sexuality. He was more focused on things like gender roles, like who should cook, who should raise the children, that kind of thing. Does that make sense? Okay, also, Janet Lever did a follow-up study to Carol Gilligan's research. Remember, Gilligan addressed socialization in males and females. What did Lever find in terms of children at play? What were the tendencies between males and females?
Like girls tend to be more attracted to dolls and stuff.
No.
Or is it the opposite?
Does this have to do with the child? Something?
Has to do with children, yep.
Yeah.
So did she find that, like, the games that kids play, were they like, boys and girls played the same type of games? Or was there a difference?
There was a difference.
Okay, what was the difference then? What type of games did boys favor?
Like the violence.
Rock.
So like,
Like active games, like
guys like sports, girls like dolls. And
No, games that there were, that the key variable there, if you remember reading, was games that had clear rules and clear winners and losers. Like at the end of the day, it's like you win, you,
Clear rules.
yeah.
Oh, how guys seems to.
So for example, like, we'll use dance as an example, right? In dance, when there's competition in gymnastics, they have judges and then the judges kind of weigh stuff out and they're like, okay, this person won. Whereas like in basketball, like, I'm not saying one's better than the other, but which one is it more clear as to who won at the end? Basketball or the dance? Basketball, right? So I mean, sometimes there's obvious examples, like if I went out and tried to do what our dance team did, it'd be like, okay, you suck, you know? But sometimes there's like, how do you determine who won between like the two best people? Like there's judging and there's some gray area there, right? Whereas in like basketball or baseball or football or there's a clear rules with a clear score and like it's easier to tell who won or lost.
Because guys like justice and women are feeling.
That's the Gilligan emphasis, yeah, Lever went a step further, yeah. Okay, if, like in your family, your mom makes all the decisions, what type of family do you have?
matriarch.
Matriarchal, yep.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say.
Okay. We also talked about types of slavery. What's the one where you like make people move around against their will?
Trafficking.
Human trafficking. What if you like, you get married off to some guy you don't really want to marry and then you just have to do what he says? It's a servile marriage is what they call it. What if you like go into debt and you can't pay it off? What type of slavery is that?
Money debt.
Debt.
The IRS.
Debt bondage. I thought somebody heard say student loans. So I'm still paying student loans off. Not as bad as some people, but yeah, my interest rate on those is so low, so I pay that off minimally and then I pay for other things instead. Okay, and then what's the type where like the South in the United States prior to the Civil War? Where like one person owns another person?
Corporate?
That's called chattel slavery, CHATTEL. Chattel slavery, yep. Okay, I mentioned to you how there's a section where you have to identify which countries are high, middle, or low income.
Is it gonna tell us like the money that they bring in, or is it just gonna say like check?
Which of the following countries would be considered a high income country? And then you have to pick from a list.
Oh,
It's gonna be probably
are we
pretty
allowed
obvious.
to look at the map then?
You could look at the map all you want up there. It's not, I mean,
Oh, because I
yeah.
can
I mean, you
picture
can-
what is.
So some of them are pretty obvious, like, but some of them are a little harder. It's not like I'm like, which of the following is a high income country, and then I gave you like United States, and then it's like 4 African countries.
Well,
You know what I
it's-
mean?
United States.
So yeah, so I made it a little trickier than that, but not. If you read the chapter and paid attention, you should be able to reason your way through to figure out which one.
Is Mexico high income still,
Yes.
right? Okay.
Yeah,
They
that,
have tourists.
Yeah.
What about Russia?
Russia's high.
Yeah.
China and India are middle.
So like the top
China's
10.
middle.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Top
Really?
5 or
Because
10.
like, I don't know, from the movies, it shows like they have all these tall buildings and lions.
so that was after.
That's like the like certain areas, but there's so much like poverty in rural China.
It's the average income, right?
Yeah, yeah. So the analogy I use for that is like I use my cousin again, right? Owns a farm, farmer, very rural North Dakota. There's like 100 people, probably not even in the town he lives in, right? So he's got high-speed internet, he's got a PlayStation, he's got cell phones, all that stuff, right? And then I'm kind of in a middle section of the country in terms of like, I'm not in New York, I'm not in Los Angeles, whatever, but I have pretty much the same thing as him, other than I have more restaurants I could go to see if I want. or Guatita and more movie theaters, but like running water, electricity were about the same, right? Okay. Whereas in China, it's like you go from Hong Kong or Shanghai, even within the city, there's big, big differences, but go from there to like the Tibetan Plateau, it's night and day. Okay, anyways, in the United States, where are some of the poorest places in the US?
The Midwest.
I wanna say
Uh,
New York, some,
There are rural areas of Louisville, Kentucky that I saw. So, Some
Yeah,
more
be more specific, like,
Down south.
like it was the southern part of the city that we saw.
southern, so near the US Mexican border.
Yes.
Okay, where else?
Like,
Two other regions are missing. Like old urban core, so like central Detroit, old urban core areas are some of the poor areas also. And then what's the third area that's in the United States?
California.
Big protests near one in North Dakota right now.
Oh, Indian reservation.
Reservations, yeah, so you look at average income in those areas, those are some of the poorest places in the country. Okay. Which, high, middle, or low, which ones have the lowest population growth? Natural. Lowest natural population growth.
Low,
Rural areas.
low.
High countries have the lowest population growth.
I'm sorry, I think that's the
Because they have-
question.
Sounds
I,
about right.
I understand what you're trying to say about it.
Because they have more like birth control and stuff.
Yeah, natural increase is the
Oh,
lowest.
I thought you said like which country has the high. Yeah, that's what I.
Yeah, the one that has the highest growth or low income, they have the
Yeah,
highest
that's
birth
what I
rate.
meant.
Natural increase, but if you talk about like
Because they, like,
migration,
separate themselves.
people are fleeing low income countries, right?
Mhm,
And then they're coming to high income in droves.
mhm.
So, okay. Let's talk about the Davis-Moore thesis. There's like 5 questions related to the Davis-Moore thesis. Davis-Moore thesis is a functionalist explanation as to why there's stratification. What does the Davis-Moore thesis say?
That they're, in my simple terms, like they're poor people, and rich people, like it works for a structural reason.
Yeah, society needs to have inequality
Yeah.
because it's functional,
Mhm.
because it provides an incentive to draw talented people into places in society where we want the most talented people, right? That's the core assumption of the Davis-Moore thesis. So we make doctors go to school forever, and then we pay them a lot when they get done because, like, if you had to pick which thing in society do you want the most talented people, it might not be number 1 for you, but everybody in here would have doctors up there on the list, right?
Yeah, it's just like for me though, personally, like a doctor who just graduated and got a job somewhere and he had to do like a surgery on you compared to a doctor who's been a doctor for like 30 something years.
Mm.
Or
Like-
do you want like a McDonald's person like having a surgery on you that
Yeah.
doesn't know what bones what and like
Yeah.
what muscles where?
Well, like in that case, I would choose like the experienced person, but like in that, I just don't trust like
Well, that's what pay
every
raises are
doctors
for.
are different.
That's why they do residencies. So funny story, when my daughter was born, they're like, oh, we've got a student, like, do you mind if they come in? And my wife's like, I don't care, whatever. So they have a resident that's like going around and it's like my brother-in-law's roommate. Like he was going to med school and we'd like met him and hung out and, you know, so then he like comes in and he's like, oh, you know, cause it's kind of awkward, you know? So like that, right? You follow a doctor around for a while, almost like student teaching. And then when you do surgeries, like early on, you have somebody that's in there with you that kind of does stuff too. And they start you out with like easier cases, like cutting into somebody and making sure you don't kill them is easy, you know what I mean? But, so that's why they have residencies now. Have you heard of that before? Or have you guys heard that term, residency?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Med
just
school.
like the idea of cutting into
Oh,
somebody.
I think I understood your story just now, I'm like, what?
Did you get my story or not? Like the resident, the guy that was doing the like student teaching kind of thing for doctors was my wife's little brother's roommate, yeah.
That
Yeah.
had to be awkward.
It was awkward, yeah, but, anyways, okay. So the Davis-Moore thesis assumes that you need to offer different rewards in order to draw people. There's 5 sections where it gives you quotes and you have to pick the quote that most matches the Davis-Moore thesis. So it's like question 1, pick the quote that would most agree with the Davis-Moore thesis. Unequal rewards for working are unfair. Does that agree with the Davis-Moore thesis?
No.
No. A system which rewards poor workers and good workers the same is not functional. That's true, yeah. A system that rewards poor workers and good workers the same is not functional. Davis-Moore thesis would agree with that, right? Does that make sense?
Because then everyone would
So
just-
basically, you're gonna get a bunch of quotes and you have to figure out which one fits with the logic of the Davis-Moore thesis. Okay, let me give you a couple other ones, just to kinda get the idea. Social stratification should be limited by government intervention. That does not fit the Davis-Moore thesis. Social stratification has beneficial consequences for the operation of society.
Yes.
Yeah. So you guys understand?
Yep.
So there's 5 questions where it gives you a list of statements and you have to figure out which one most agrees with the Davis-Moore thesis. Okay. If you want to be like comfortably middle class, in addition to like getting college educated and stuff like that, what's another variable that is very heavily tied to being fairly wealthy and fairly secure financially?
What's like a job title?
What could be job or something else? I just said variable.
Like you as a person or you as a country? Like
You as a person.
Okay.
It's kind of obvious, but I don't know if you guys will think of it, so I'll just tell you. If you get married and you stay married. So you get married and you stay married, and the text talked about that. The guy that did the study is Zagarsky, and he basically said, okay, simple math, right? You live in one house, you pool your resources. So if you get married and stay married, you're more likely to be middle class than somebody that does not get married or somebody that gets married and then gets divorced. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Weber identified a term known as socioeconomic status. He was trying to explain stratification using more than just money. What other variables did he look at?
Like education.
Like how respected you are?
Yeah, prestige.
Prestige?
Yeah. And then what else? Education's too specific.
Family.
Not family.
Your job you hold, like
Yeah, but you're more broad, you're too specific.
power.
He looked at power, prestige, and money. So, like Obama right now, right? There's a ton of people that make more money than Obama in this country, but he's got a ton of prestige, right? How many people are president of the United States? How many have we had total?
45 now.
45 now, 44 so far, yep. So, like, that's a big deal, right? That's a ton of prestige. He's got a ton of power, right? So he'd be very upper class, even though we could probably identify in the United States, I don't know, 300,000, probably more than that, probably 1 million people that make more money than him, right? There's a lot of doctors in this town that probably make more money than Obama.
Oh yeah,
So-
some neurosurgeons make $250,000 a year.
Yeah.
Or like, no, not a quarter, like almost $1 million.
Yeah, so
Just,
it's 3 variables, not just money. Go ahead.
Like, this is just a off subject thing, but like, how, like, what do like presidents do, like, after they, get out of the
They
office?
can become like governor or they can like retire.
I think they.
I think they get the
Or
right
they
to
put
stay,
into-
They get a pension, like they get paid a salary, it's less than what they get in a given year. And then they have Secret Service
Yeah.
assigned to them for life that follow them around and make sure, because they know stuff that we don't want random people to like kidnap them and torture them to get the information, right?
Oh, okay.
But typically what presidents do is they get involved in some type of charity or foundation And then they get paid, the way they make their money mostly is they'll go give speeches and people will pay them to do speeches once they retire. So like if you're a pretty big business, you make a ton of money, like Microsoft, and you have like a meeting with your board, at the end of the year, they might bring in a president to speak to you. So that's, for the most part, that's what the presidents do, is they get involved in a charity and try to help out with that, and then they give speeches and get paid. It's still working? Should be. I charged it and I deleted all the videos off of it. But the video of my kids dancing was recorded as that. Okay, anyways, let's keep going. There's like 4 more questions I want to talk about. Let's see. Talked about that. What's the key difference between income and wealth again?
Income is what your salary is, wealth is what you're worth, or like what your stuff is worth.
Right.
Land and stuff.
What's the difference between blue collar, white collar, and pink collar?
Blue collars, like working,
It's
white
like
collars,
construction.
like company, like a desk job, and then like,
Pink color is like,
Those loans, do we have a income?
Pink is jobs that traditionally are held by women.
yeah.
So there's a couple questions where it says, it gives you a list of jobs and you have to figure out which one best fits a certain type. So my job is what, mostly? White collar, yep. Kindergarten teacher, pink collar, yep. Administrative assistant, pink.
Really?
Blue collar is labor. Administrative assistants often would be secretaries,
Are you
right?
talking about like office ladies and
Yeah.
stuff like that? Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I gotta head out.
okay, that's fine. Yeah, there's 2 more questions I wanna talk about, but you gotta go ahead. Okay,
Alright,
so be able to identify that.
have a good weekend.
Yeah, you too, thank you. Last couple questions, types of feminism, remember we talked about that? Had a little clicker quiz. Radical, socialist, and liberal. Which one says the problem is the capitalist system? We should change that. Socialist. Which one says we should work within the existing system but pass like targeted laws to try to improve stuff? Liberal. Which one says we should totally turn the system on its head? Not look at male-female differences. Radical. Yep. Okay? Any questions about anything?
A lot, but
A lot? You can push stop, that's cool.